Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Johnson. I'm the director of China Megacities Lab here at GSAPP. And I'd like to welcome everybody tonight to a discussion, Boom, the Future of the Museum in China. Again, it's sort of exciting to extend this dialogue and bring the dialogue here to Columbia. It's part of, again, a continuation of discussions that we initiated over the summer during a summer research workshop in Beijing, initiated with Pei Zhu, collaborated with us, and also John Rajchman from Columbia here, that had to do with basically rethinking the idea of the museum and if there are ways that we can sort of look to China in the current sort of museum building boom to look for sort of new models of the museum itself. Again, this is, we started in Beijing with sort of 4 closed-door roundtable discussions on the topic with artists, curators, directors of museums, and architects. And just recently, in the last couple of weeks, we had a discussion in Shanghai and one just recently in Hong Kong with M+, the new museum, which is considering many of these same topics when they consider their new museum that's forthcoming. So just in a sense to give a little sort of introduction or background to the sort of phenomenon of the building boom of these museums, basically paralleling the sort of ascent of the economy in China and paralleling urbanization. China's basically building about an average of 100 museums per year. And it's even been noted that in 2011 nearly 400 museums were built in a single year. So again, put that in perspective, that's over 1 museum per day. Part of this is initiated obviously from sort of soft power initiatives from the government. In a sense, certainly the government-sponsored museums, where many of these museums are being built within new municipalities, within new cultural districts, new CBDs, etc. In a way, in an effort to elevate the quantity and the number of museums in China to towards at least equaling those of international standards. And some sort of predict that in a sense that to equal sort of international standards, that may require another 30 or 40,000 museums being built in the next decades. So again, just the magnitude of the construction of these museums is immense. So again, for us, what's interesting is to extend the consideration of what can we learn from sort of this construction boom of the museum typology. So in a sense, again, as I said, many from sort of the sort of government-initiated museums have to do, again, with sort of constructing a certain civic identity to many of these new civic centers. And in those museums, in many ways, construct, again, a civic identity and play a sort of positive role within the sense of placing or locating culture within a sort of high position. Again, the architecture in many ways also reflects that in its sort of ambition. And we see many of these new structures being designed by renowned architects, 2 of which we have here tonight. And again, the sort of role of architecture is very clear in the sort of ambitions of the municipalities within each of these sort of conditions. The second sort of type, which is also quite interesting, are sort of the private museums, which we see in for the most part, many of the contemporary art museums are of a sort of private ownership or non-for-profit sort of ownership condition. There we see a little bit more freedom in the way that the museum operates within the sort of context of China. And again, we see actually interesting models that relate from either those initiated from private collectors to artists building museums for themselves, for even the fact that we see private developers building museums within their sort of residential developments, not only to gain sort of incentives from the government for more FAR, but also to sort of elevate, again, the profile of their project. And in some cases, we've seen both in sort of Times Museum in Guangzhou, designed by OMA, and other examples where actually the programming in the museums themselves are offering actually very interesting and alternative models to the museum itself. Now, aside from sort of all the positive and good intentions of the construction of so many museums, there are obviously some negative consequences to this. And some skeptics, in a sense, do claim that perhaps, or question the fact, is it necessary to build so many museums so quickly, and if sort of resources could be better spent elsewhere. In a sense that, again, is a condition now where basically, again, a surplus of sort of museum space is the sort of condition where there's sort of a lacking of a deficit of sort of content. But I guess in a way that the way we look at it too is the fact that it's sort of easy to maybe question that or be critical, but are there possible opportunities to think of how those spaces or the way we think about designing these museums could take advantage of that, certainly in a short-term kind of condition. Because most people, most experts we met with do believe that it will just be a matter of time where these museums become, again, more vital and more, filled with sort of conditions of, or filled with sort of collections that are appropriate for each of these structures. And again, I think what's important here as we talk about these kind of conditions is that by looking and asking sort of the people tonight to invite them to the panel, would be the fact that we have sort of two architects on the panel today who are designing amazing structures and museums in China, and we have two people who can respond to that, who come from sort of the critical side of thinking about art and museums itself. So in the format, I'll just briefly discuss the format, then I'll introduce the panelists tonight. So the idea was that basically Stephen Holl and Zhu Pei will present a few projects for 10 or 15 minutes, and then John Rajchman and Michelle Kuo will respond briefly or add some comments to the presentations, and then Dean Mark Wigley and I will also lead a sort of question and answer discussion following that. So I'll just briefly introduce the panelists. So again, the first speaker needs really no introduction here, especially in this room. It's Stephen Holl. Again, his work continues to inspire, and his dedication to the practice of architecture is sort of unprecedented. The trajectory of his practice includes many museums, from Kiasma Museum of Contemporary Art in Helsinki to Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City, to the Nanjing Sifang Art Museum in Nanjing, China. With his sort of recent work in China, where many architects seem to struggle with both its pace and scale, Stephen seems to have found inspiration from it and has embraced it with ease. From offering alternatives to the typical enclosed blocks with projects like the linked hybrid in Beijing and the sliced porous block in Chengdu, to his challenging of the verticality in his horizontal skyscraper for Vanka in Shenzhen. But of course, it is because of the museums and the amazing museums that Stephen has built and is proposing currently in China that we invite him here tonight. Pei Zhu is, again, as Stephen even said earlier, is this sort of leading architect in China. And certainly, again, that's sort of initiated much of this research through a couple of years of conversations together, of finding something that we can collaborate on. Zhu Pei was adamant that it was time to assess this condition of the museum in China. So it's through that sort of these conversations with Zhu Pei that we initiated this research. And again, Zhu Pei studied both in Tsinghua, that's a master's degree from Tsinghua in Beijing, and UC Berkeley. And Zhu Pei has worked with the Guggenheim Foundation for projects both in Abu Dhabi and for proposals for projects in Beijing. And he has been awarded or been recognized, let's say, recently as one of the 5 greatest architects under 50 by Huffington Post, the Design Vanguard Award by Architectural Record, and the Corvaisier Design Award by Wallpaper Magazine. And Zhu Pei has also been selected to be one of the architectural juries on the Mies van der Award. Again, what's important here with Zhu Pei is, in fact, as we talk about the sort of museum building boom in China, Zhu Pei, of course, if you ever get a chance to visit his office, you'll see basically scattered throughout the entire offices are proposals for museums and cultural centers of various scales and sizes. I think it's the majority or all of your work, I think, for the most part, right? And again, we're glad to have Zhu Pei here tonight. John Rajchman, again, as I mentioned, is a collaborator on this research project with us in China Megacities Lab. He is a philosopher working in the areas of art history, architecture, and continental philosophy. He teaches in the Department of Art History and Archaeology here at Columbia University, where he has for the past 5 years focused much attention on contemporary art in China. John is one of the leading thinkers on the convergence of philosophy, art, and architecture, and is the author of numerous books and essays on the subject. He is a contributing editor for Artforum and was the only non-architect on the board of a series of 10 multidisciplinary and cross-cultural conferences on the condition of architecture at the end of the millennium. And again, John, it's great to participate here. Michelle Kuo is the editor-in-chief of Artforum. She is the author of exhibition catalog essays on the work of Robert Rauschenberg, Otto Pina, Fluxus, and Le Corbusier, among others. And she has lectured widely on modern and contemporary art at institutions including Columbia University and MIT List Visual Arts Center, and contributes to publications including October and the Art Bulletin. Michelle is also a PhD candidate at Harvard University in history of art and architecture, writing a dissertation titled "To Avoid the Waste of a Cultural Revolution: Experiments in Art and Technology, 1966 to 1974." From 2005 to 2007, she was the Wyatt Pre-Doctoral Fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art. So again, I thank all four of you for joining us tonight. I think, Stephen, would you like to start us off? Thank you.
I'm just going to show two buildings, but I want to refute the word quickly. What do you mean build so quickly? The first building I'm going to show, I started in 2003, and it's still not open. That's 10 years, it's not quickly. So that's in Nanjing. In fact, it's my first project. It was how do I run this thing here? So those are the museums we've done so far, and the only ones that are going to be built are the ones in red. So that's a lot of museum work that just goes into the drawer, very disheartening, just like any other place in the world. Maybe Italy is worse. and this is my first project in China. So, and I didn't go to China because I was looking for work. Izusaki invited me to come to China. Rata Izusaki is one of the most generous architects that I can remember. He's the reason I went to Japan, when I first went to Japan. And so anyway, that was my second trip to China. By the way, this was my first trip to China. And Young Ho Chang, it was freezing, and he got me a coat, a real Mao coat, because it was so cold. And I always wear it when it gets really cold in New York, just so I can remember. That was 2001. I'd never been to China before 2001. So this is 2003. We come back to China to see the site of the Nanjing Museum. And this is there a pointer here? This site is a little bit out of the city, but if you get up high enough, you can see, and this is a very amazing city. Some of the ancient walls from the time it was the capital of China in the Ming Dynasty. So there's some really interesting aspects of Nanjing that I love, but we're a little bit out of the city. So I'm trying to make a relationship to this site, to the city of Nanjing with the building. And it was a project, it was my first project in China. It was started, they said it was going to be an architecture and art museum, but then they changed that. Then they said it was going to be an architecture museum. Then they changed that. Then they said it was just going to be an art museum. And it's still not open. And it's famous. A lot of people have visited it, you know, and we'll get to that. So, but my idea was then, I want this building to be an exploration of early Chinese painting. And one of the things that I love about these paintings is, even though perspective was known, the Chinese refused to use a vanishing point. They used parallel perspective. And I think it's because, and Zhu Pei will tell us, but I think it's because of the scroll. The nature of the scroll is you always want the perspective. So my idea, and then I said I want to relate to the shifting viewpoints, the layered spaces, the expanses of mist and water, parallel perspective. The building should have parallel perspective. It should be black and white, because there's so many of these paintings that are just black and white. And they had all the colors in the world, but they decided on black and white. And I decided on black and white because I said, the artwork will bring the color to the place. Black and white is a good background, right? The artwork can bring the color. And then I thought it should be also heavy and light. And I'll show you that in a second. Oops. Oops. That's the first sketch. And I made that on the site. It's all black and white. And my idea was there's going to be a base that's going to be parallel perspective, but you're going to be able to ascend and look back at Nanjing. I want to see the city. I want to be connected to the city. And there's the parallel, there's 2003. There's a parallel perspective field. This is a field of space in which it's warped so that the feeling is you feel like there is no vanishing point. So that's the idea of a field of parallel perspective space, and this is the idea of then coming to the view of the distant city of Nanjing. And the heavy and the light. So the idea of two materials, heavy relating to the city, relating to the history, and light relating to something, looking back into the air and there's the building. That's all made out of bamboo formed concrete. And then this is a special lightweight polyurethane, super insulated UV. And then, so you can see there is quite a close relationship between 2003 and 2011. And the thing took so much time because they built it by hand. I would go on site there and I'd say, where is everybody? And then they'd say, well, they're back there. And they were living behind the site, and like there were chickens out in front and a dog. And I'm looking, where's the contractor? So they were building this for like 7 years. And when we did they dug these geothermal wells. We always do geothermal heating and cooling in our buildings in China, which is something I have to bend arms to get in America, but they always want to do it. But they dug these geothermal wells by hand. Very interesting. So it was all handmade. And then we made we found bamboo on the site that was quite large, and we lined the formwork. So the concrete work is all in bamboo-lined formwork. There we are on the site after about 3 years, still under construction. Come to the site, keep visiting it. What's happening? How come this is going so slow? Very, very slow. It's kind of interesting. And Guy Nordenson did the structure engineering, and I said, Guy, what is that going to cost to build in America? Because it's coming down on 2 legs, this thing that's looking back at Nanjing. And he said, it's about $3 million worth of steel. It was $300,000 installed, welded, in place. That whole piece up there, $300,000. You can't build a house for that in America. There it is, when we could first see it from the distant view. And you can see how this is the headpiece. There's several other buildings in this complex. It's an architecture exhibition site. Beautiful idea. And that's the head building. Izusaki's building is over here. Satsu's, bless his soul, is over here. Chengdu, what's the great architect from Chengdu? You know. Yes, is here. So it's a real, and then Sajima has a piece over here. So it's quite an interesting thing. And maybe one of the reasons they didn't open my building is I think they're waiting to have all the other stuff open at the same time. And now it's finished. Construction's been finished for 2 years. And you can see that view back to the city of Nanjing, this floating element, a kind of lantern, and the field down below. So, and it's very economical. Its trusses are spanning. That's the concrete wall. This is the entrance piece, a little chunk of bamboo. Walk in, and the gallery goes, then you go up, and now you're in the upper gallery that turns, well, one turn clockwise back to see the city of Nanjing. All black and white. This is great for sculpture. Now, I was especially thinking this would be a great space to show architecture models, you know. And then you come back, and that's the view. You can't, it's one of those cloudy, misty days, but that's the city of Nanjing. And there's a close-up of the bamboo formed concrete. When President Scott Cohen arrived at the construction site, he said, "Stephen, don't paint it. It looks great. Gray. Leave it gray." But I wanted black and white, so gray and white wasn't what I wanted. So I stained it black. And then during this period that I was working, there were a bunch of crappy developers tearing down hutongs in the middle of Nanjing. Beautiful old buildings which break your heart to see these crappy development office buildings and really bad architects from Hong Kong, you know, those big companies with 5,000 people. So I decided I want to get this material for my courtyard. So we went and we got these gray hutong bricks, and that becomes the bottom of our space. So the entire field of parallel perspectives is paved with hutong bricks. Probably, I don't know, they could be like 1,000 years old? Could they be 1,000 years old? Maybe. They're very old, a lot of these bricks. And that makes up the whole, and then because there's nothing else there, the grass can grow between them. So the interesting thing is, and the herringbone is very tight. So the interesting thing is it's like a green space now, because there's enough grass that grows up between it that makes the whole space green. So it's not like a hard surface, it's just, I'm very proud of that surface that I made there. By the way, the museum has nothing in it. And my idea was about space in the first place, remember? So it's perfect. I don't ever want them to put anything in it. And by the way, it's very economical to run a museum like this. You don't need a director. You don't need a staff. And anybody can visit this place. It's a museum of space. This is about architecture, by the way. Sorry, the art people here. I don't want any art in this building. I'm very happy with this building just the way it is. It's weathering quite well. You know, I've been working on it 10 years. I'm going to go there in October. They say they're having an opening in October. Watch. They have a website. Go to the Xifang Nanjing Art Museum, and it says opening October, but they didn't give a date yet. So I'm waiting for that date to appear, and I will be there, but I hope they don't put any art in it. This is the other building that we're doing. This is going to be built. Everything's been approved, and this is definitely a new type. And Jeffrey was talking about a new type. This is a new town in a reclaimed, polluted salt flat and oil kind of disturbed zone. This is the old city of Nanjing, very moving place. And there's Beijing. That's about a 2-hour and 10-minute drive. And this is a brand new town. It's being funded by the Singaporean government together with the Beijing government. That means the money is already there for everything in this project because Singapore is flush with cash. They don't know what to do with it. By the way, for all your graduating architecture students looking for jobs, you have to go to where the rest of the world's economy, where all the cash is, and it's in Singapore, Hong Kong. Hong Kong has 23 times more money in their coffers as a city. You know, they don't know what to do with all the money. So part of the problem, or let's say the issue of these buildings that are being culturally buildings that are being built, libraries. It isn't just museums. There's city halls, there's libraries, there's many other buildings. You know, it's not a museum boom. It has to do with the unsettling aspect of the global capitalism. And for 10 years, everything was made in Asia, the Pearl River Delta, and now all the cash is over there. So it's just the reality of the world, you know. I mean, so anyway, this city is 1/3 built. It's already 1/3 complete. This part of it is already, people have moved in. 500,000 people are going to live here. And now they finally, and there's not one single piece of architecture in the entire 500,000. And they decided to have, for the CBD and what they call the cultural center, to have a competition. And we were invited. And that was my sketch. There's the CBD. And I said, that was the competition was in January of 2012, and I said, well, there's they want to build 7 buildings at once, a library, a senior citizen center, an art museum, you'll see them in a minute. And I thought, well, let's make each one of them a kind of necklace. And then we said the CBD should be all black and white, very simple, all orthogonal. And then the library, whoops, what happened here? Is somebody messing around up there? Sorry about this. The library is a piece of, each one of these has to do with being a gemstone. Anyway, I won't go into it, but each one. And we didn't win the competition, but you can see there's the planning building right there. They said, we want to build that, and we want to put it there, and we want another one symmetrical beside it. I said, what? So then, I wasn't even going to do it. I was so upset. First of all, they said GMP won the competition, which is a German firm that I don't like. I hope there's nobody from GMP here. But guess what? They just paid them off and didn't follow their plan. They did the plan internally with the local Tadi, Tianjin, what do you call it, the local LDI. So basically there's nobody working on, they gave GMP the library. That's what they did, as a kind of consolation prize. And then they wanted me to build the planning, because they always build a planning museum first. It's like the city, a big model of the city, they build it first. And they wanted to put it right in the middle, and they want 2 buildings and 1 symmetrical. And I said, first of all, but then I had this idea. If you thought about ecology and planning, I mean, they're kind of like yin-yang, like bao-gao, like they're related to each other. So I said, let's take, this was all about carving out a simple rectangle. Let's take the inverse of that and make the ecology museum here, and then we'll have a public space. And everybody was gone. It was Labor Day weekend. I was all alone, and I sent my idea to Beijing. And guess what? In China, it's not Labor Day weekend. Everybody's working. So the next morning, I had this overnight. And because I didn't know what that space looked like, see? I only knew what it looked like from the outside. So I said, take your computer and reverse the inside and give me what that looks like if you turn it inside out. And she sent me this, and I said, damn, this is going to work. This is a great idea. And then I drew that watercolor. People think I knew what that looked like, but I didn't. I had to have that computer drawing to tell me exactly what it was. And then we started to look on the inside. This is great space. The Ecology Museum, is different from the Planning Museum, and yet they're related. And then we can fit the whole program in here. And then we can have a public space between the 2 buildings. There's the Planning Museum. There's the Ecology Museum. This is the garden going back to the CBD. I'm using bamboo-lined concrete because I love that stuff. That was a nice, then I put the whole building as a structural load-bearing concrete, and then all lightweight steel, magnetic induction bent, that forms all the curvilinear things. So we can form those curves in the computer and bend all those steel pieces without special working drawings, because we can do it digitally. So all the hard stuff carrying the big loads, that's all orthogonal coming down on both buildings, and the curves are bent steel, then plastered in some cases, aluminum on other cases. 600,000 square feet. The Planning Museum is 300,000 square feet. The Ecology Museum is 300,000 square feet. So now they're starting to like the idea of the 2 buildings, because I said, just let me do it. They only wanted to build 1 building, right? I said, look, we'll give you the Ecology Museum for the same price, 2 for the price of 1. And they said, okay. And then every time I go there, I tell them how important this Ecology Museum is, right? I mean, I said, look, I did some research. This will be the biggest ecology museum on the planet by a factor of, like, I don't know, maybe somebody knows another ecology museum somewhere that's a decent size, but I bet it's not 300,000 square feet. So then they started to get pride in the project, because they realized that could be a draw in and of itself. So then I started to pay more attention to the Ecology Museum, because they know what they want to put in the Planning Museum. I need to convince them that this is an important building. So right before I'm running to a meeting, I think, how are we going to organize 300,000 square feet of ecology? And I had this quick idea. And I bet this is the day I have the meeting. I said, I just pulled this out. You remember Rayner Banham had something about 3 ecologies? That was about Los Angeles. I just remembered it. This doesn't. Yeah, but this is this is a polluted version of having that thought. Okay, so here's what I said. I said there are only 3 ecologies. There's Earth to Earth, and that's 4 billion years old, plus or minus 3 million. There's Earth to human, or human to Earth, and that's 7 70,000 years old, or depending on. And then there's the unknown. That's Earth to the cosmos. We don't know where we're going. We know where we've been. So then I said, let's take Earth to Earth and slide it in underneath the plaza, and we'll put all the ocean stuff under the plaza. And we'll put human to Earth in the middle, and that crazy arm cantilever thing that I can't justify, suddenly it has justification. Because it's Earth to the cosmos. I mean, it's got to be weird up there, right? So that's how I got this thing to stay into the project, because there's this enormous cantilever which was left over from the other design. That's how I got it to stay in there. Oops, let me go, and now it's all working. You enter here, you go up this big elevator, and you come down this one on ramps. You go underneath, that's where the big ocean show is. Then you're in the planning museum, and that's all escalator circulation to the top, and here's a roof garden. So you can go in either one or another, but there's a loop that connects everything. And right now, we're almost on the verge of getting the contract to design all these exhibits. And how did I do that? I saved $1.7 million in steel, and I said, that's exactly the number we need to do the exhibitions for your ecology museum. And this is the ecology museum. Coming in, you go up that big elevator and you come down. These are early sketches. That's halfway up. All acoustic plaster. And that's the planning museum. Some ideas about exhibits, not much. Outside, we want to use some lighting that will make these different areas pretty interesting. We have a cafe up here on the terrace. There are terraces. On the Ecology Museum, there's terraces all around. And there's, this is the public space. So there's the entrance to the Ecology Museum, and the entrance to the Planning Museum is right there. So we have a cafe here. We have music on the water. This is about a meter deep, very shallow, and recirculating water system, all recycled water. But there's some really interesting spaces in this project, and I'm very excited that it's already been approved. It's gone through all stages of approval. And the money is in place, and they say they're going to start construction in November. That means this project will start construction 1 year and 2 months after I made the first sketch. So it's very exciting, and I won't go into detail, and I think I went too long already. And I have one problem, and that is I was in a dust storm 10 days ago, and I was a fool because I just put this little rag on my nose, and I went out in it for like 10 minutes or 5 minutes, and I have sand in my lungs. So I can't be part of the panel. I have to leave. And then when I got back to the office, they said, "You're stupid. This is what you have to wear. This has a seal all around it like that, and it has special filters." So my people in Beijing keep me. They didn't get to me early enough. I have a very young staff. This is one of my guys in Beijing. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Chu Pei. Thanks.
Okay, thanks Mark and Jeffrey to letting me to give the talk here. So I'm going to talk to 3 museums. Hopefully these 3 museums can give very basic sense about what's going on in China. So the 3 museums located in different places. One in Shenzhen called OCT Design Museum. The second one is Minsheng Contemporary Art Museum in Beijing, and also Jinjiang the Cultural Center. So if you look at this chart, you're going to have some, you're going to get some sense, internal logic. The first museum is kind of the size very small, it's 5,000. The ownership is the developer. So the biggest one is government. So you can tell the secrets. The Chinese government have very special policies sometimes. They always combine the cultural facility with commercial development together into one package. Once developer got this package, they try very hard and also to make effort to minimize the size of the museum. This is the reason we can see the developer always to doing the small things, they doing the big things for the commercial. The big one, the reason the government, they are willing to make a big cultural facility because they doesn't care the money. They want the impact. Once you're big museum, you must have big impact. And also the achievement for the official, that's also the project size and also how quick you build. That's going to be the one mark for the promotion of the leadership. The Minsheng MOCA is kind of a very unique the situation. The Minsheng is a private bank. In the last 10 years, they continue to invest the contemporary art. I think this is only the only bank in China to doing the contemporary art. What's the reason behind? Actually, I didn't figure out, but they continue to doing so. The first, we're talking about the design museum. This is the location. So the whole commercial development, including the very little cultural, they call the design museum. The small, the clubhouse done by the Rajchman. So this is like a Bay Area. This is located in Shenzhen. The inspiration for this project actually come from both the site context and also desire of the surreal exhibition space we try to explore. This is the plan. The ground level is roughly small, only for the lobby, information, and also reception. And then the ones there leading people to the major exhibition space. The third, the third level also is exhibition space. This is we did a lot of work for the construction site. This is our team. They always been the construction site to supervise the work. During the construction, we also always to discuss with our client what is future of the museum. So this is actually Tom Prince. He also been the job site to talk. So this is almost finished, and then this is done. So I think a similar situation like Stephen, your museum in Nanjing. Initially, this museum, designed for the design museum, since Shenzhen want to apply for the design city in China. And then after we built the current situation, this museum, I don't think is design museum anymore. They convert into the more like the car show, concept car show and fashion show. I think it's very popular right now. It's the most the important car brand to always occupy the inside of this museum. The exterior, the stainless steel surface, actually want to use the to clarify the profile for the exterior, and also the soft reflecting the quality can be make the building itself somehow very sort of soft, and also to disappearing it's not heavy anymore. But the interior, we want to take advantage of the size of this museum. Since size kind of small, very easy to control. We would like to make more experimental for the interior space. We want to somehow the interior space somehow more somehow surreal. The exterior kind of clear the geometry and also the profile, but inside you feel boundaryless, especially for the curving, the white curving surface cast in no shadow. You feel it's not in the real place. You feel somehow in the cloud, in the fog, and then we can create a sense of a surreal atmosphere for the industrial exhibition. For example, like automobiles always feel very heavy, but we think about we can hang on, and also you're going to feel kind of weightless. You're floating. So this is after the building is built. Definitely this is right. The photo take, right. This museum right finished, but no any exhibition inside. So this curving, the interior space is I'm a little bit surprised the quality. Initially I thought that's going to be kind of rough, but eventually they come out very smooth. So overall space is we not want to create like a white cube space for this museum. We think about maybe this space can be more floating. Things our program is not very clear. Initially they're going to making the industrial products exhibition, and then they turn to the fashion show. Right now they became to the more like the car exhibition. Ideally, we still consider this a design museum, and then the Tom Cameron's, he invite the Austria, the design curator. He made some proposal for this museum, but the difficulty is, and also the challenge for the owner of this building, they're not willing to doing so. This exhibition going to cost a lot of money, right? Since you have to invest, because this is a developer, the ownership. But currently, if they make like a car show, they can make money. So this is the real situation. The second project I'm going to talk is the current under construction. This is a renovation, the project invited by the Minsheng the bank in China. The building located in the north 798, just a little bit north. The existing building used to be Panasonic, the factory, the workshop. The idea for this museum, we want to create more diversified in terms of the space and the program. We learned some lesson from the OCT Design Museum. In the very beginning, this museum, we're working with GSAPP. We invite Tom Kearns to working together. We developed very initial the diversified concept. For example, the exhibition, the space is turned to very different size, and also not only this exhibition interior space, but also we create a big courtyard. This is 3 different sizes and also different typology of the exhibition space surrounding in the lobby and atrium area. And also we propose the big box, black box, which is we can providing the lecture and also maybe for the performance in order to we can to change the activity of this museum. Once black box built, that's going to carry on this museum into the nighttime, not only just the daytime. This is a ground level. The level 2 is going to be perfect. The gallery, which is the 7 meters story, 7 meters the story high, and also they have they can dividing into the different sub-gallery. This is the level 3. So existing structure is kind of very typical industrial. The factory is 300 meters long and also 70 meters wide. We just break up two points. One place is atrium, since we want to create a central atrium in order to connect different gallery. The overall circulation, people going to be, from the ground level, they can, start by the big box, medium box, small box, and also, and then people can get on the level 2 into the perfect gallery. The program is not only gallery, but also a lot of commercial, a lot the archive, children education, the performance, the program. The detail of the exterior material, we are, the past a lot of recycling the material going to apply to the exterior surface for this building. This is atrium. The reason we created this atrium because we want to the building become to the destination for the 798 area. If you have been the 798 area, the lot of the small gallery, the random, located different area. After you're visiting, most of the gallery, less public space, less to contain the most public activity. So this building going to be played a significant role to hold people, to attract most of the people to stay. They can be, the one destination of the 798 area. So in order to encourage people to come in the building and also can spend time inside, we convert the stair into the more like amphitheater, the type of the stair. This is an elevator. We also contribute some idea for the more like a contemporary or art installation. The cord with the black box for the elevator. This is just a reverse. The people can see the two right box and the black box, go up and down. The second level used the similar approach. The stair also used the roughly the bigger and wide amphitheater idea. So this is the level 3, going to have roof terrace and the video, the gallery. This is a level 2 to connect the major, the perfect gallery. This is inside the big box. This size, we feel this we need providing the roughly the bigger size of the this gallery, the 27 meters wide, 90 meters long, and also we left this existing truss to the 40 meters tall. This is and then this is very typical. The gallery space, we keep the existing beam and the column, existing floor, maybe just to refinish this concrete floor, and then we introduce some white wall and also white ceiling to create a very typical gallery space if this is compared to the big box. Which is keep the Rajchman and this is end of this space is end of the long gallery. The gallery, the distance is more than 100 meters. People must be very tired and exhausted. So once they end of this we call the volcano space, we can give the opportunity for artists to create some commission project. The courtyard is also another the kind of a type of exhibition space, but sometimes they become to the commercial space. They also can providing the surrounding with a lot of commercial cafe and design store, for example. The end of this the courtyard is the black box. We keep the existing concrete, the structure, and then we introduce the second layer of the material. The sliding facility can be hung on, some artist work, and then we can stimulate the open courtyard into the very unique activity, public activity, the space. This is a black box. We can, consider this is a lecture or for the performance space, but at the same moment, you also can become to the exhibition space. For example, sometimes situation is the lecture condition. Sometimes this door can be totally open. This is like an aircraft, the storage, and then this black box going to be open to the big courtyard space. The sliding facility going to providing really flexible the lighting and also can hang on artist work as well. This is in the exhibition space condition. We also, like what I said before, for the very beginning of this project, we work with the GSAPP to discuss what's the future of this museum, and also we invite the artist Anselm Gifford to join our discussion. Since Tom he proposed the one exhibition is going to be the Anselm Gifford's exhibition going to be happen in this building. So this is kind of a very different with our first project. Our work is not only the architecture, but also we work closely to working with the museum consultant and the artists together. This is a construction site, and this is an existing truss, and then we left up this truss. This is going to be the big box space for the museum. Victoria, you see. The next project is it's not purely museum. I call the cultural mixed use project. This is the advised by the government. The site of the cultural center is in the center of the new city. The one public green space going to be flow into the Yangtze River. This city, they kind of the rich, they based on the cargo industrial, and also in the Yangtze River, the delta area, they have, the most of the richest city. The economy really booming. And then they, suggest to make a very huge cultural project. This project is 130,000 square meter. Initially I thought this is this number is wrong, but they, actually they really want to do it. But the too bad, I have to mention GNP again. This is a competition. We just won the competition like early the few weeks ago. The one of the second, we competed GNP, together in the last one. So our concept is like a sponge effect. Since the program is very complicated for this project, we are thinking about we can take this advantage to create the sponge architecture, in terms the space program is very diversified, and also the building really the transparency. If we go back to the site, this is a Yangtze River. You're going to see the huge horizontal, almost no big building in the past. Even the city is kind of low density. The building is kind of low, very low rise approach. This is a very, the fundamental nature of this building. So we're, concept try to catch up this idea. Basically, we create really horizontal building rather than the density high building. So this is what we proposed. We create two component. This is going to be cultural component, which is museum, the library, cultural center, and also another end is going to be performance center, including the Grand Theater and also IMAX cinema, some commercial program as well. In between, the center is a public plaza. This is a program they proposed. So the performance, cultural center, museum, also urban planning, achievement hall, library, etc. It's really, the governments try to put all the public program together into the one building. And then we proposed those program is not based on the linear arrangement. We want to create center in order to unify the old program. So this is our layout based on the site plan. This is an open space for the new city, the surrounding by the government building, and then this is going to be the public green corridor into the Yangtze River. This is the site. Site is kind of a huge block. This is the cultural component and also performance part. In between is the public plaza. The B1 level, the performance, the commercial, the museum, the cultural center, and the library. The three building is interlaced each other. This is a level 1. the public plaza, the theater, the commercial. This is level 2. This is level. It is also 3 cultural, the building, the cluster together. This theater, IMAX underneath this commercial. So the section is the very simple 3 tower to providing efficient the program arrangement. The public, the space occupied by the big theater here. So this is a center, the plaza space we create. Once people come in, they can along the public, the stair, amphitheater, and also ramp go to the different level. The whole floating roof to unify all the program together. Underneath is we created the kind of transparent public space. This roof also providing the shading, since this region is lot of rain. So most of the time people also can stay underneath this bigger roof. The inside roof is going to be most the program is public. The roof going to be the green roof idea. So this is a more like center. This is a cultural components. This is in a very preliminary conceptual stage. We're not really developed. The reason I show this project because I just want to talking about like a new trend of China. They not only create a single museum. They found out most of the museum after built, nobody to operating, no program, no real collection, and then they start to making everything together to create more cultural place rather than just a single museum. Currently in our office work on like this cultural center is like 4 or 5, like mixed use. That definitely also work on some theater, the museum as well. So this is a very general information. I'm not trying to emphasize the architecture design. I just want to introduce some situation, some cultural phenomenon in China. Thank you.
Thank you, Ju Pei. So I think again, Stephen and Ju Pei gave us a sort of great introduction to a number of 5 sort of diverse museum projects that give a wide range of sort of both in scale, in type, and ambition to sort of discuss now further. So again, because Stephen has to leave soon, I think what we'll do is if John can come up and maybe have a few words, and then following that, then Michelle can add a few words and some thoughts, and then all of us can join each other at the front table for a few questions. Okay, John?
Well, as Jeffrey said, I've sort of had this vague consulting role with this project from the outset. It's very interesting. It's a kind of research project in which I'm learning as we go along. And so it's very interesting to see both the variety and the details of these projects, all of them very interesting. And I'm sure in the course of the discussion, some of the details of the design details will be talked about. I just wanted to make some very general remarks about the way this problem of museum construction in China, or the boom of museum construction in China, impacts or is connected to the problem of art museums and therefore art itself. Not all museums, of course, are art museums. not in China and not in general. And we see that there's some kind of fluctuation. There's a cultural center, and it's very interesting that the government thinks that that's the form that they need to develop. It's not only in China, though. There's cultural centers in many different places. The Tate Modern, they want to rethink their museum as a cultural center. And of course, in Hong Kong, there's the M Plus as part of a cultural center complex. So maybe that's a first kind of point. So perhaps I'll just make some very fast remarks, and Michel maybe can take up and develop those. First, it seems that, so why China? Why this incredible production of museums in China? What does it have to tell us? Not simply about conditions in China, but about what a museum is, and what an art museum is, and what culture is, and so forth. I think it's true that the boom of museums in China is connected to another boom, which is just the boom in housing and construction and so forth. That's been part of this incredible experiment that's taken place in China. Stephen's remarks about the destruction of these hutong spaces, the way he's using these bricks and so forth, part of the questions that were raised by this. It seems that architects were offered the opportunity in this great building boom to do things that they couldn't do elsewhere, and it allowed for architectural experimentation. I think that the situation of the museum boom is a little bit different because it combines the problem of the construction boom, the role that construction boom has in the economy, this situation of this wealth that's now funding these things. There's now a desire for that boom and this wealth to create cultural entities, and that gives you a different kind of problem. And so it's in this way that this larger Chinese situation intersects with a debate that we've been having, which is what on earth is a contemporary art museum in the first place? We've had lots of different models. MoMA in New York, that's a modern art museum, at least before its current expansion. Bilbao, that's a postmodern museum. Rosenkrantz called it the late capitalist museum. It's very interesting that Tom Krenz is having this consulting role in these Chinese museums, as though he were bringing this earlier expertise into this new situation. It seems that the contemporary art museum is neither a modern art museum, as the way MoMA is, and it's not like Bilbao either. It's not a Guggenheim franchise that's moving out. It's an attempt on the part of the Chinese to rethink and reabsorb the very idea of what a culture and art museum is, and that's why there's a zone of experimentation, and that, in effect, was the initial hypothesis that we started with Jeffrey. In what way can we see this current museum boom as a kind of laboratory for museum forms in general? So we're proceeding, and Jeffrey's proceeding. He's organized already. He's looked at many different prototypes. He's organized discussions, and it's a kind of ongoing situation. So I'd like maybe just to make a few more remarks to maybe sharpen the discussion a little bit. If it's true that China is a kind of laboratory for new museum forms, and in particular for new art museum forms, how do we think of this? How do we think of it beyond? How do we think of the prototypes and the different design proposals that are being offered as attempts to understand this situation? And it's interesting, therefore, to look at one attempt on the part of a New York art critic, Holl and Carter, to describe a little bit from our point of view in New York what this thing looks like. He has his types. He has what he calls billionaire vanity museums. An example of a billionaire vanity museum is this Long Museum in Shanghai, which is has an incredible collection. One of the things that Holl and Carter says that's interesting is that there's no museum in China, even though there's this enormous boom, that's capable of telling the story of their own contemporary art and how modern art influences it and how that all works. Nobody can tell the story because you can't get the works in any one place and you don't have the expertise. So why it's spread out and there's these different sides to it. So you have a billionaire vanity museums, and it is an extraordinary collection that you see in this Long Museum. You have private museums, and you have state museums, and then you have these cultural hubs or cultural complexes, all different types. I think I would add to this typology of different kinds of museums looked at from our point of view in New York, and also the point of view of how do we understand and show art, and how does this the new construction, what does it tell us about art and how we show art? I would add first that there's been this incredible infrastructure, that's art infrastructure, galleries and biennials and fairs and all kinds of things that have been built. And 798, of course, is this incredible example of this. Now the museum is trying to create a little bit of public space in this enormous commercial center. So when you are talking about building a museum of China, you're no longer talking about, you're talking about an attempt in China to create their own art world, their own infrastructure. And one consequence of this is to attenuate an earlier situation where the big museums and collections were in New York and Paris and London, and everything else was on the periphery. It's very interesting, among the aspects or the elements in the larger field in which the museum construction is taking place, the role of biennials. And in the 90s, you had these early biennials, and there was one called Cities on the Move that was done by Hu Hanru and Hanzo Obrist. And it's already in that where they say, we have to get away from this kind of cultural heritage that's held in centers in Europe and America with everything else going on in the periphery. We have to see that there's many centers and that art is done in these centers, and that an artist is somebody who's based someplace now, but he shows in many different places and has a certain kind of itinerary. So I think I think the biennials were initially in the 90s a place where people were also examining what this new situation was. I think increasingly they're absorbed into a larger commercial and institutional conflict. It makes it very difficult for them to keep up with that role. All of these features that you see in China, billionaire vanity museums, private museums, cultural hubs, are not only in China. They're a general reflection of the changes in the economy and wealth and the transfer of wealth. For example, in Brazil, there's a space called Imochin. That's a very rich person who sold mines to the Chinese, who's built this incredible sort of ecological park where they commission works outside of a city. very different kind of thing. So what impact is that money and that kind of museum going to have on the traditional museum structure in Brazil? Typical kind of question that's paralleled, I think, a little bit with the situation in China. Why then is China in some kind of privileged position to examine this larger phenomena? And there, Holl and Carter says two things that are interesting. The first is what he calls the surreal scale of the museum construction, the sheer scale, the sheer ambition of making all these museums in China all at once. So everything happens on a big scale and all at once. First feature. The second is that the art museum in China is something that's a relatively late form. We in Brazil, for example, there's been museums and discussions about museums and biennials, for that matter, for many years. The situation in China, very different. The art museum is kind of a new form. The relation of the art museum to the public, to the audience, to the city, all those questions, therefore, are occurring in this new way. So China is in this kind of privileged position where they're doing everything all at once in a situation with a slightly historical vacuum where there's not much precedent, so that they can invent more. And it's in that situation that they can look back at our models and the previous models in this new situation and try to figure out what to do with it. And that's a little bit the zone of intersection that interested me. And so I don't want to take up too much time. I just wanted to add one final remark to this, is that in many of the projects that Stephen and Juppé were showing, the imagination of the museum was rather independent of the programming. Of course, in this cultural center, it's different because of the attempt to sort of link those two things. So the programming problem, what on earth is going to be put in these museums, and who is it going to be shown to, and where, and how, and so forth, those questions are still unresolved and are part of the experiments and the discussion, part of what I would call the laboratory situation. And sometimes that situation, Jeffrey used the word content, so there's, first you put the form and then you sort of add a content to it. And then sometimes it's called software and hardware, so a museum was a computer. First you make the hardware and then you have the software. But I think you have to think of it as functioning in an urban and cultural field, a museum. So when one imagines this experiment going on in China and people look back at our earlier models, which models tell us something about this relationship of the field in which the museum figures and its relationship to art? And I don't have much time, but I wanted to do a very fast history of that. I think if I had the time, I would start in the post-war period with Henri Malraux, who had this idea of what he called the imaginary museum, or the museum without walls. The main idea of that is what art is something that fits in a museum. That's the museum without walls. And so when you go to Africa and you see cult objects and so forth, that we call them art because we imagine them in the museum. That idea of Malraux was said to be in ruins in the 60s in New York. Douglas Crimp's famous article, Museum in Ruins. Why? Because the artists in New York were challenging that idea. They were engaged in institutional critique. They were going outside the museum into non-sites. They were doing all kinds of things. And so the museum form was in ruins. I think that debate maybe has some kind of role, but it looks very different now. If you take somebody like Andrea Fraser, very much involved in that, an artist, New York artist, first she says, we used to be institutional critics, but now we are the institution. And then she says, our only hope is to get out of the economy of the 1%, this great luxury economy and try to find some other and critical model. So I think the Bilbao effect, the Beaubourg effect are similar ones. So I guess I won't say more about this little history of mine of these different models, but just to say that maybe there could be something now called the China effect. But the question, I think, of the China effect is not simply the museum construction, but the way that museum construction intersects with this other problem, what's a contemporary art museum? So those are some very general remarks, and let me maybe turn things over then to Michel.
Thank you, John. Michelle?
So I prepared some questions, which I'll, I guess, reformat into just some quick remarks before we break, I think, for a perhaps wider-ranging discussion. But I think what we should remember, maybe in the context of this evening, is that museums in the West were often built out of sync or without knowing exactly what would be shown within them, or at least what kind of shape those internal contents would take, or how they would change, or what they would incorporate, or how they would adapt. And it's this kind of dislocation between a sort of shell and interior, or hardware and software, if you want to call it, that is in fact probably a much older problem than we might give due. So this kind of dislocation, or even parallelism between a supposed shell and an interior is perhaps what will allow us to rethink certain categories of museology now, and particularly in the Chinese situation. And these categories, I think, maybe I'll even go a bit broader than what John was outlining. But they might range, of course, from the ethnographic, or the anthropological, or the natural history museum. And among the institutions I visited in mainland China, as well as in Taiwan, include a dairy museum, a fish museum, a museum that was devoted to a certain type of cedar wood. So this is a sort of interesting model. Of course, there's the encyclopedic museum, there's the regional museum, there's the contemporary art space, and attendant to that, the mixed use or the leisure space. And then, of course, there's the kind of private collection come public museum space that we're seeing more of in the States and in Europe as well. And these all beg different questions of presentation, whether you might use a period room, or you might be thinking of a Richard Serra sculpture, or a scroll painting, or a small artifact. Those are the kinds of things that the sheer range of objects we might be attending to. So the risk, though, of this kind of dislocation, and maybe this moment in which we are at now, is that the concepts might remain archaic, even if the spaces are forward-thinking, or the sort of inverse, which is that there might be an imposition of one culturally specific form onto another that might ultimately be incommensurate. And this raises the question that I was hoping to open up also just to the architects / architect that we'll have at this table, but what the role of the architect becomes vis-a-vis the curator. And that is to say, on a very practical level, hang heights, circulation, flow, lighting, natural lighting, how many incandescent lights will you have? That's, of course, a sort of issue with period rooms as well. So that becomes this whole area of museology that may, in fact, become part of the purview of the architect. And I guess I'd be curious to know how and in what fashion architects in China, just specific cases, are working with the teams of curators or the people that will be running the space in the future. And finally, I think, just to keep this brief so we can move this to discussion, I'll leave us with a question that I hope we can answer a bit, which is that the museum, I think in all of these plans that we've been seeing, which are really fascinating, the museum can change how we see the objects inside, but can the objects stand up to the space? And that's the question that I hope we can discuss a bit more now. So sorry, this is very brief, but I do think it would be nice to.
So I think now we'll have maybe a few questions from the table here, and then we can open up for a few questions from the audience. But maybe we can sort of start with Michelle's question in a sense, and maybe John or Zhu Pei can respond, since Stephen had to leave, since you are the only architect left on the panel who was not a moderator tonight. But I think it does bring up other issues, and it comes to our discussions we've had many times together about, in one way, the sort of confidence that the clients have, we know specifically coming to you, Zhu Pei, with the project, where even in an attempt to bring in specialists or bring in Tom Kranz or bring in someone, expect in a certain way that the architect knows what a museum is and should be. And in the fact of to come to you and help basically program the museum for the client. So maybe on that level, and I think you've made a huge effort in a way in many of your projects to bring in then collaborations and bring in and build a team around these certain challenges. So I think maybe it's interesting maybe to speak a little bit about that sort of process. And I know that there's still, as I know from speaking to you, challenges in that, because in a sense, again, like we said, it's generally not difficult to convince an architect that we know everything. But in fact, so it's harder to recognize the fact that you don't. So in a sense that I think it's really interesting, the fact that you being asked to do so many cultural projects and museums, that you feel that there is basically a lacking in that sort of level of collaboration expertise, and how to define those kind of conditions, not only from a very technical point of view, but programmatically as well.
Okay, so I really hard to make any judgment, but I can introduce some situation. For example, most of our clients consider you to be the master. Basically, you can do everything. So once they approach to you, they consider you not only to be the architect, but also maybe the curator, the museum expert, or even a curtain wall consultant, theater consultant, etc. They not really actually this is should be teamwork. So this is a very general situation in China. The most of the time for us, we have to explain to our client, for example, we have to let them know the museum is not only the shell. We need the contents. We need some people come out some idea before we work on the architecture. For example, like a program, and also the object, the goal of this museum. What's the operating idea, and also what's the collection, for example. The many client or the people who want to build museum, they not really clarify the definition of the museum. They totally have a different sense with Western museum. They not consider they even want to use the museum to make money, or to become to the tools, attract people to make achieve their commercial purpose. So I think this is our situation. Sometimes for the small project, you must do everything by yourself. But we do learn a lot of lessons, for example, from the OCT Museum. Initially, they have a clear program object, but along the time they change, and then we, for the, since then I start to form the team. For example, we have to work with the people to propose some right idea for our client. Yeah, that's the situation. Yeah.
But for me, of course, when Stephen said he didn't want any art in his space,
that's where we begin.
I have the same emotion, but let's say on a bigger scale, because when each of these museums is, as it were, given content, in a certain sense, those museums no longer contribute to the potential to answer the question, what's the future of the museum? So as each one is transformed into a sort of fully operational museum with a program and a collection strategy, the right kind of curators and so on, in a sense it's no longer interesting. And so for me, the thought would be something like, in which way would an oversupply of museums create the conditions for a rethinking of the museum? And if I understand, I mean, again, you're speaking about China, which is where more than 50% of the world's new buildings are built each year. That is to say, China is the norm, and everything else is the exception. So also, just to frame this question, it's not as if China is an exotic place. China is the norm. It's the sort of default setting. So if the default setting is a kind of oversupply of museums, I understand from Jeffrey's figures they have a long way to go to get to the point of oversupply. So fortunately, if they keep building the museums so fast, there will not be the production of artists and curators and infrastructure and so on to match. So this sort of unused potential could be activated, and it seems to me that the potential lies a little bit in what John was saying towards the end, in the kind of field condition. That is to say, to what extent could this oversupply act as a sort of network system, structure, through which different kinds of flows could be encouraged. And I think that getting back to Jeffrey's first point about the China as a laboratory, I think that's also very important to understand that China is perhaps a kind of early warning system in terms of trying to understand what might be happening in India, which might be demographically bigger, economically bigger, and India in turn might be just a step on the way towards Africa, which is very likely our shared future. So if you imagine that we're in a kind of snowballing ecological shift by which the United States, North America and Europe are not very active participants in the future of cities, which I think is the fact, and yet the Europe especially gave birth to a certain understanding of the museum. There would be the thought that something will happen in that space, but it might not happen to the word museum itself. In other words, it is also possible that the meaning of the word museum has already changed radically, and I suppose it's the beginning of a question, because the museum also has a kind of domestic origin, and one of the ways in which the museum no longer has such an interesting. One of the ways in which the museum is in ruins is the extent to which all of our own apartments are already operating as museums. In other words, all the same logic of curation, of collection. You know, as a young citizen, you are encouraged to be the curator of your private collection, which you then exhibit in a series of very staged performances accompanied by theories of various kinds, and that presentation is multimedia. It's done on your cell phone and on your website and so on. So let's say the logic of the museum has in a way already returned to its domestic beginnings. such that when we do visit a museum, we actually encounter a kind of watered down, almost neutralized version of our operation. And it seems to me museums have, this is becoming a speech, museums have become in the last decade profoundly jealous of the streets, and even of, let's say, popular culture in general in terms of their operation. So getting back to China then, the question would be something like the emptiness of these structures, the lack of programming, the vague sense that you need museums in order to have established your dignity as a member of contemporary society and so on. It seems to me that idea could well pass, and there would be then a kind of retooling of this capacity. And anyway, if you take a museum, for example, like the Museum of Modern Art, not one example amongst others, really, to what extent does what's on display matter? Right? In that very, very full museum, does it actually significantly affect the visitors, the art world per se? Like, what is in fact the role of, and if we are not sure of this, we are not sure whether, either because it's not a very interesting place or because the difference between one exhibition and another is no longer very significant, then when we look back at the empty Chinese capacity, what we mean by content would change, wouldn't it? Right?
Yeah.
One could hope. I think one question that actually your presentation raised was whether or not, though, the sort of ruins of the museum, that is to say, the critical bona fides by which we in the West understand the disintegration of the institution, are perhaps upended in a very different cultural context, either for better or for worse. That's just a question to throw out there. I think, honestly, if you go to MoMA and you see the show that's up there right now, Inventing Abstraction, that to me is almost a show that, before anything else, it says to you, only MoMA could do this show. Only MoMA could get these loans. Only MoMA could get this wall of Malevich's. And honestly, maybe that's not a bad thing. I mean, I think the question of preservation, which is, of course, again, the museum as mausoleum, it's the end to the museum, or it's the end game of the museum, it's still something that we have to take seriously on a practical level. And I guess that's the question in China, what is the fate of preservation, of cultural and historical preservation? Because as we know, that has everything to do with how we adapt to this contemporary landscape that you pointed out. We do become curators of our own sort of domestic or intimate environments. But I wondered, actually, another question, which might be a little bit more pointed, is whether or not the Palace, there is a historical collection. It's in the Palace Museum in Taipei, and I wondered,
it's in Taipei.
That's a different model. I mean, that has had a history of museums, in Taiwan, obviously, and then how they treated this collection, but I wondered if that was anything that ever, you thought about, or if there were certain opinions regarding the stewardship of that, of how you present a kind of historical lineage to China. But it's a thorny question.
I didn't got your point, so sorry, I lost my mind. So your mention, today our topic is more focused on the maybe contemporary, right? So what's your question about it?
Well, I guess there were several questions in there. One was just about the Palace Museum specifically, or because we were talking about historical museums, which are part of what museums are. But if we're talking about contemporary buildings, housing cultural collections, or even contemporary art, it's still part of a kind of, it's part of a canon formation, for lack of a better word. It's a selection.
I think maybe just to add to Michelle's remarks and Mark's question about MoMA, I think what's let's say, specific about MoMA is that it has an absolutely incredible collection. It has the collection of modern and post-war American art. And so the problem that MoMA has is that that moment of modern and postmodern art in Europe and the United States no longer has the role that it used to have. On the other hand, that art is very important, and it should be seen in China. And of course, we see a little bit of Richard Serra in your illustrations and so forth. So you're imagining a little bit that art that we used to collect, and of which the MoMA is this. And I guess I agree. The abstraction show is very much a case of that. They at MoMA can tell that story. But it would be very interesting for that story to travel in some way to China. And there I think we'd see it in a different way. A second maybe aspect of this is that the works that are not in the canon, the works that are not in MoMA, to put it very crudely, what do you do with those? And of course, there's how in China they see the art that we now own, but there's also the problem of how they understand their own artistic production. And there also seem to be these gunpowder paintings, Imagination of this Museum, or Zhang Zedong's Bloodline series and so forth. So you're imagining that in this Minsheng space, there's this kind of story that's being told, but it was unclear to me how the different elements fit in that story. So I think, MoMA has tried to be in contact with China, and Chinese invited the administrative staff of MoMA to have a big symposium discussion and so on that sort of didn't produce very much, but it shows that there's sort of interest in that problem. And so I think, in a way it's very good for MoMA to play the role of preserving our art, because that's what they have. The question in China is, which is an interesting question for MoMA ultimately, is how that collection that they have will have a role in a global situation they no longer dominate.
Mm-hmm. Or will every space just be built to house a Richard Serra sculpture?
Incidentally, the Richard Serra side of it, there was a museum in 798 who wanted to show Richard Serra, but I contacted Richard. It's in fact not so easy, and he's not so happy about it.
But again, just pushing the button one more time, if you could argue that the only reason we would even accept that Serra is an artist is that it's been collected.
Well, Richard Serra is an artist that gave lots of problems because he built this public art space called the Tilted Arc that was removed, and there was enormous debate.
But in this moment, that's true, let's say, in a certain moment.
The other thing about Richard Serra is he's permanently housed in Bilbao, and the Gary architecture and the Serra sculpture was supposed to be married in this incredible way. And
but just at least run through the possibility that that's not art, other than art understood as that which has been collected. In other words, it no longer offers a kind of perceptual challenge, and it's no longer something that enables you to see your world differently. In fact, it only allows you to see the world the way you wanted to see it already. So that, for example, if it appears in a rendering of a new museum, it's the marker of the fact that it is a museum, not the fact that there is art there. It just says museum. If you push that kind of argument, then I think the potential of the sort of oversupply of so-called museums is enormously, which is almost, let's say, a sort of military build-up of the capacity to exhibit. That capacity can have its greatest effect not by putting objects in those things, but understanding that, as it were, a kind of comment or a strategic location has been identified for art and for museums in general, which doesn't necessarily have to be in those spaces. In other words, it creates the potential for an artist to think of their work at the scale of China. So, for example, in the same way that you can have imagined an artist organizing something for for a church in a moment in which it would not have been called art because it would be inseparable from the building, would be actually architecture. Then it's removed, placed into a building, becomes part of a collection, part of a market, etc. If you run that argument to its extreme, a kind of a sort of network of unused museum capacity would be, as it were, a potential site for new forms of art, not just new locations of art. In other words, one could imagine artworks that engage with that as a network. And I think this seems to me the great promise. And it seems to me that would be a kind of artwork matching the scale of the nation, which was anyway 200 nations kind of constructed into one, gathered into one. So in reverse, imagine art operating at that scale. And it seems to me this is entirely plausible technologically, philosophically, and so on. And in a certain way, when architects are asked to build so many museums in so many different places, architects are already operating in that kind of field. Artists are operating in that kind of field. Curators, for sure. I mean, Hans Oberst, I think, is very rarely outside of an airplane, and then he's back in. What hasn't been imagined, it seems to me, is the art that really reacts to that and thinks through that. We have the global distribution of art, we have the global commentary of art, but we don't, as it were, have the artwork of that space, because that's a space, it seems to me. And I'm sorry again for the speech, but the network has become the potential space of new forms of production and criticism. And in that sense, I would return to the original comment that China would be in a unique position to create a space for new forms of production precisely because the European/American model hasn't been fully absorbed or can be absorbed. To the extent that it is, I think the whole thing becomes absolutely uninteresting. It would be absolutely uninteresting to find beautiful collections in every museum in every city of China. It would be about as boring as you could be. And I don't think China is a boring place at all.
Maybe one other strand that interested me in this problem that maybe connects to Mark's idea of network, because I gather your networks, they're global networks.
Right.
It's on over on the plane and so on and so on.
Right.
And how those networks are connected to what goes on locally, that's of course a source of much debate. And, I think one of the things about the museum form, the Western museum form, starting with the Louvre. Of course, the Louvre is in Dubai now, but when it was still in Paris, is that it came after the revolution, and the idea was that those works that were in that museum would be shown to a public. It wouldn't be controlled and by rich people and aristocrats. So the museum was fundamentally, in Europe, addressed to a public. We've had an incredible debate about what a public is. There's Jürgen Habermas, who says that early idea of the public was completely invaded by this publicity and advertising and fell and so forth and so on. So China strikes me as a really interesting case for this problem of public. First, because in the imperial situation, there was very little public space. And in the modern period, since it was so much tied up with this revolutionary idea that Mao had, which was for the people but not for the public, in neither the modern or the traditional sense was there very much. So this kind of gap that Mark was talking about, that could be have an architectural side, the sort of indeterminate nature of the architecture being important, or the informal nature of the architecture maybe. But it's only when that informal side of the architecture is connected to something more than just the demands of a client, something closer to a public, that space would become really creative.
Yeah, I mean, one hopes, I think, this notion of what you were actually calling infrastructure, or like a networked space of air travel, of shipping and transportation, of new media networks, that already exists in a certain extent between art fairs and biennials. And as we know, sadly, there is already, or not sadly, but for better or for worse, there's already a type of artwork that is developed to meet those demands. What you see at art fairs, works that are easily transportable, are often made to demand, look good in JPEGs. So that's the flip side, I think. But one hopes, of course, that it would, I mean, as you're describing, it could absolutely give rise to heretofore totally unknown and really interesting, forms of expression.
Maybe just to follow up on that and with the sort of question that also that you pay, I think, your sort of final project is the cultural center that you're showing, and as you said, as a sort of new trend of project types that's happening in China, and of which you're working on 4 or 5 of them right now. Again, there were, in the sort of discussions that we had together in Beijing a couple weeks ago, having to do with sort of the potential in those sort of types, which I think it deals with public in a much different way, let's say, or in maybe a different way where, in part, it's about attracting a public, in a sense, at least in the conversations. I'm going to ask a question without answering it, but I thought that was sort of interesting in the way that the understanding of the planning of the programming of the cultural center had to, in a way, also attract multiple sort of publics to that site, and how and what could be the sort of ways to conceive of that. Also, the notion of how you approach the design, or the design of many of those things. I mean, one of the things that came up a number of times was in the fact there are sort of different durations, right, in certain types of planning. So some level of flexibility was really important because of the fact that these sort of uses could change and change rapidly, right? And not only the use of from exhibition to a commercial venue to film but the fact that these spaces in a way would not only adapt to sort of the uses, but adapt to sort of the market in a certain way and what those could be. So in a certain way, that's to me a response to some of these things that we're talking about, these sort of new models which are in fact already predicting the fact that this is a sort of short-term versus long-term duration for how these are used, and attracting a general public, and what sort of, as Ark was also saying, what we would consider a museum in sort of traditional sense or Western sense become a far more kind of diverse and complex kind of thing. Certainly when we consider the fact that it can adapt to many kind of issues. So I'm wondering if in this sort of conversation, do you feel like in some way that's one of the sort of alternative models, or where do you find those as a sort of potential or limitation of how we think about these sort of potentials?
Yeah, I think the reason I call the mixed-use, cultural mixed-use project is very popular recently. I think government, they have certain pressure. They want to develop, the certain scale of a cultural facility. Definitely museum, they're facing the huge challenge about the contents or collection. Things very less cultural institution or museum, they have their own collection, especially contemporary art. That's the difference the history museum. I think a lot of history museum in China, they have kind of a strong things. They have a lot of collection. In order to create the big scale of the museum, I think the diversified program, they basically put like a museum, the cultural facility together. Maybe this is one of the idea, and also this idea can be, to make this building, it's not going to be the like a museum shell. They can, they easily to programming, for example, a cultural activity library, the shops, the theater. They would like to put everything together. If I back to the network, the issue actually, we have done a lot of work with Tom's team. Basically, in current Chinese situation, they build a lot of the contemporary museum without contents. But a lot of Western museums, they do have a lot of collection, but they kind of
Nowhere to put it.
yes, you're right. So that's a very good balance. If the collection can be traveling, for example, that's maybe possible. The collection going to traveling from Western to the China, for example. If you're really traveling, it's not only the one museum, maybe multi-museum going to be exhibited, since China is such a big country. And then I think that's possible. They can cut cost dramatically. I know, those art, they can be, more active.
I mean, I think, if what is a museum in China remains a question mark, a productive question mark, then actually the kind of cultural center is a good hiding place for the question. Because if you say somewhere in this mixed use thing is the potential future of the idea of museum, and you make no assumption about where that is, it seems to me that's an interesting place to be. And also in terms of public space, because public space doesn't exist in China in anything like the form that's, you could argue it doesn't exist in the West either, that it's a kind of nostalgia in the West, but this doesn't even exist as a form of nostalgia in China. And then the question would be, what is that space then in these cultural centers, which are neither private nor public? I think in there is an interesting sort of negotiation zone. So it seems to me very intelligent, and flexible. That's the advantage of it. What would be interesting is to not be clear which part of the mixed use is the word museum belongs to. It would just not be very, very clear. I mean, maybe we have to the thing is that there is this sort of Stockholm syndrome where some people don't know when to leave. And the idea is that we would just keep talking and then eventually the room would be empty. But there is a certain moment when we realize that you won't leave no matter what. And this means you are truly victims. And for your own good, we have to stop. So I think we should. But if you think of Stephen's museum, what really is on display are the bricks from the Hutong. So in other words, it's actually completely full of content, but the content lies not in the galleries, but in the space outside, which for me, not accidentally, is the space of domesticity that has been, as it were, reorganized and redistributed. So I think there are, again, I wouldn't assume in this conversation about the museum that the so-called content is what goes in the museum, but if the museum is just a node in more complicated movements and so on, then I think it's more productive. But maybe we have to be here at this very table asking the question, what is the museum in India, right, Africa, etc. Like, place the question in a more global context. But we have to end, and I really wanted to thank Jeffrey and Pei Zhu and Stephen for. And I'm just mystified why you are still here. We did our best to bore you. It didn't work. Next time we promise to be using more advanced techniques of being irritating so that you will leave more quickly. But anyway, thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks.